Hey, good afternoon. Thank you, Allison, and thanks everyone for joining. So it's time to pick back up on the planning for the transition to ICD-10 yet again. Following the announcement last April, most consultants and professional organizations still recommended that practices and hospitals continue their preparations unabated. But, given the myriad of competing priorities in healthcare, everything from meaningful use attestation to ACO, planning and reporting, and understanding the proliferation of plans for the implementation of the healthcare exchanges, this became more of a best-case scenario than that of a practical reality. It's far more likely that most organizations table their work on ICD-10, but now that we're a mere 200-plus days away from the current deadline for transition on October 1st, 2015, it's really time to turn our attention again to ensuring that our organizations are fully prepared for this large transition. For our agenda today, it's going to be, pretty straightforward. We're going to give an introduction, looking at where we stand with ICD-10, step-by-step program that we're going to go through to make sure that if you're not there yet, what we're going to do to get you back on track, and some key takeaways that you can take away from this to help with the preparation and planning. And right off the bat, we got our first poll question, so I'll pass it over to Al.
So our first polling question, is your practice on schedule for the October 1st deadline? And your choices are, yes, we'll be ready October 1st. We've started preparations but are behind schedule. No, we haven't started preparations yet, or I don't know. We'll give you a few seconds to send in your responses. Okay, we're going to close it out, and I'm going to share the results with the group. So it looks like 29% of attendees say they will be ready October 1st. That's fantastic. 28% have started preparations but are a little bit behind schedule. Hopefully some of the comments that we have today will help you get back on schedule. 36% have not started preparations yet, so today's presentation will give you a good guideline of how to get started, and only 7% do not know. Mike, back to you.
Okay, thank you. Well, I was really hoping this was going to be just a review of the groups in which you started down the path of ICD-10 preparation last year. But, hopefully we'll be able to go into more detail in some of the ideas and tasks and key takeaways in the step-by-step program that will help get us back on track for those organizations that aren't there yet. So I think in level setting, it's important to understand, why this is such a big deal, and here are some of the facts associated with ICD-10. So why are we making the change to ICD-10? ICD-10 reflects emerging technologies, particularly PCS with the ICD-9 diagnosis subset, was developed before the advent of many of the medical technologies in popular use today. It also helps in reducing additional development requests from payers due to specificity of claims. It's better able to support epidemiological trending, where we are behind the 8 ball on data collection, and our implementation and sharing data across countries already using ICD-10. Right now, the U.S. healthcare system is really one of the only major healthcare markets that aren't on the ICD-10 diagnosis platform, and our ability to share information globally is dramatically reduced. And it also allows for greater specificity and reliability of statistical outcomes, collecting better health data and the aggregation of that data globally, and puts us more on par and online with worldwide healthcare review. So here's a quick review of ICD-9, and I won't spend a lot of time on this simply because it's been reiterated a lot. But the drastic variations going from 13,000 codes with ICD-9 to over 69,000 codes with ICD-10, moving from a 3 to 5 to a 3 to 7 character maximum is going to be huge, not only from the understanding and what we've been used to memorizing in the past, but also the system modifications that are going to be required. ICD-9 only used E's and V codes for external causes and history information. And then with ICD-10, it's pretty much using the entire alphabet except for the letter U. There's multiple specifications through the second, third, fourth, and fifth digits, or it's the third, fourth, fifth, and sixth digits in ICD-10. And the alphanumerics are going to be a tremendous impact to where, what you've been able to use in the past on super bills and remembering codes is going to become obsolete and truly a thing of the past. So in looking at all measures and commentary, the change will really be the biggest thing to hit the healthcare market since, in the last millennium. Potentially a catastrophic for those that are going to be unprepared. The transition to ICD-10 will affect everything about documenting and billing for the care of patients. And the healthcare industry has received a number of reprieves in the past. Each time the magnitude of the transition seemed to be too much for providers and the industry to bear. The most recent coming from Congress this past spring. Whether another reprieve is possible is really anyone's guess, but counting on its certainty would not be prudent in any fashion. In fact, the briefing held on February 10th on Capitol Hill, hosted by the Coalition for ICD-10, the briefing was an opportunity for congressional members to hear from physicians and other experts about ICD-10 implementation progress. The central message communicated was, we need it and we're ready. And looking at some of the Finance Committee messages that are coming out of the subcommittees is looking at information while additional testing will be needed to ensure its success. The transition to ICD-10 will streamline the management of healthcare records and improve overall patient care. It will continue to keep a close eye on the issues, but they see no reason for any delay past the current October deadline. The next big step in the transition will happen in March when the SGR bill comes before Congress again. However, the report released earlier this month gives us the optimism that ICD-10 will go forward as planned. So after some report, say today's report by the Government Accountability Office affirms widespread recognition across the healthcare industry that CMS is well prepared to implement the U.S. transition to ICD-10 on October 1st, 2015. Coalition members are working together with CMS to ensure a smooth and successful transition for all healthcare stakeholders, and that the U.S. healthcare system is ready to move forward with ICD-10 on no delays. So everything that's coming out of Congress as of now, we won't know for another 30-plus days, is that we are moving forward and that there is a very high likelihood that ICD-10 will be implemented, sticking tight to the October 1st, 2015 original date set. So with that, I think we have another poll question, Allison.
Yes, we do. So we want to know from the audience, how confident are you that ICD-10 will happen in 2015? Are you confident it's definitely happening? Mixed emotions, you're still not sure what will happen, or not confident? Here comes another delay. So I'll give you a few seconds to submit your answers. Okay, let me close this and I'll share the results with everybody. So 45% of attendees are confident that ICD-10 is going to happen this year. 49% still have mixed emotions about it. They're not too sure what's going to happen, and only 6% are not confident and are expecting another delay.
Okay, well that's interesting. I think right now it's looking like it's trending towards, from information coming out of Congress, that it will be supported to move forward. Again, it's up to anybody's guess on what it's going to actually happen in March. But I think, even though we have different percentages of those individuals that have options either way of whether or not they feel it's going to go or not, we need to make sure that 100% of us are moving forward with planning as though it is going to happen in October. So with that being said, it's really time for us to pick up that old ICD-10 folder from the corner drawer of your desk, dust it off, and we need to get work preparing your organization for, again, the single biggest transition to hit our industry in decades. Chances are that you're somewhere along a timeline in preparation in April, but as different organizations, we're in different places. A lot of times we're going to have to start from the top and take you through a step-by-step program to help you get ahead of the ICD-10 wave. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and get started. So you should really start by naming a project manager who's going to be appointed for organizing all the efforts and marshaling resources. This person is going to be the central repository for the preparation and dissemination of information for providers and staff. They're going to need to identify and catalog the work at hand, make assignments, and set timelines for the implementation at each stage of the project and preparation. A strong project manager is going to be key, but make no mistake, while this person does the organizing effort, everyone is going to need to be involved and be completely committed to the effort. There should be regular meetings scheduled between now and October 1st to discuss progress, identify barriers to the implementation, and ensure that your organization is staying on track based on your project timelines to meet readiness for the October 1st transition. A thorough evaluation of the current state is going to be your critical first step. You need to examine all the areas that are likely to be affected, and there's going to be more than what you just originally would think of. Every stone that you turn over and lift up, you're going to find additional information or different opportunities. You need to be running reports of the top codes that your practices use. List your coding FTEs. Who is certified? What is their current accuracy and their productivity models? And of note, according to HFMA, they're expecting that coder productivity on the initial implementation of ICD-10 is going to decrease by 50% based on ICD-9 productivity. So with that being said, there's a potential that you to be half as effective and efficient, or to need twice the number of staff initially in order to be able to keep current volumes going. Understand your system topography and how they all relate. Your practice management system, your EMR system, interfaces to your lab and other diagnostic systems or elements, interfaces that you have with health exchanges, interfaces that you have with hospitals. Look at your current documentation. Is your current documentation going to be sufficient to support the specificity associated with the ICD-10 codes? Collect samples of your super bills and order forms. Look at them, scrap them up. More than likely, depending on your specialty and your process, these are going to become obsolete. Thoroughly document your pre-op and your referral process. And don't be naive to think that your system vendors are going to, quote, handle this for you. This isn't like the 5010 transition, which was primarily a back-end data exchange transition. The transition to ICD-10 is all about the patient care process and documentation. The work that happens in your practice, a systems vendor will train your docs and your staff or revise your internal forms or update key interfaces or other clinical systems. It's important that you take the ownership of this and ensure that your organization from top to bottom is ready, not only from a process and education perspective, but also from a system and technology perspective to prepare yourself for October 1st, 2015. You should really set expectations on how often and to whom progress is going to be communicated. Who's going to be responsible for, quote, keeping everyone in the loop. Set up a steering committee with representatives from different parts of the organization. It's going to be critical for proper dissemination of the information. And standardize the process and communication forms. Use collaborative tools to make sure that you're keeping everyone in the loop. A point, email is a terrible way to keep track of a project, especially when there's really great tools that are free and are web-based that are existing today to make sure that all involved have access to the same information wherever they need it. Using tools such as Trello, Basecamp, or the Google Documents are good multi-user options that allow for at any point in time, logging in and identifying with multiple users where you stand within your project. You need to conduct an impact analysis. Make sure that you have all of your bases covered. You should consider bringing in an outside consultant to organize this process. Someone has seen processes at multiple practices and organizations and will know what questions to ask and where to look for the answers. Understanding all the areas and people to be impacted will help you understand the work at hand and to ultimately set a budget for the remediation work. You will be more likely to cover all your bases if you start out in a very organized way and break up the work process, including claim submission, billing, posting payments, clinical documentation, registration, referrals, and pre-auths, eligibility confirmation, writing referrals, writing orders, etc. The list goes on and on and on. Segregating those to look at each individual component separately is going to help you be successful. Make sure that you understand current workflows, systems, and the people that are involved. Document what will have to change and who is going to drive the change of revising your forms, training your staff, changing your documentation and your documentation protocols, and making sure that all of your systems are updated. You can pull your top ICD-9 codes and understand how they are treated in ICD-10. Start now by looking at what those conversions are and start the converting process to understand what the impact is going to be for your organization. Many groups are stating that they will rely on the GIMS for a crosswalk, but that is not going to be the most accurate system. Your current vendor should already have the capability to do side-by-side coding that will aid clinicians and support staff in selection of the appropriate code. If they don't, this should be an immediate red flag, and you should be speaking with your current system vendors. So don't assume that all your system vendors are going to be ready. There are many smaller vendors that are known to be throwing in the towel on the ICD-10 changes and impacts that are coming. Their current database structure is not going to support the transition to the longer code set, and or the investment required to update all their applications is going to be much too steep. Some of these are sunsetting older versions of their software and requiring existing upgrades and or transitions to the whole new system. This, in many instances, results in additional costs that you're going to be unaware of. You should reach out to all your vendors with a questionnaire that forces them to document and answer all of your questions. Will they be ready for the move to ICD-10? How are they going to manage the transition to 5010? Is there any guarantees in functionality and support? Is it ready for testing by the practice, and have they participated in any of the national testing dates over the past year? Have they tested through all the trading partners? Will there be a cost associated with the upgrade? Is there going to be new software, new hardware that's going to be required? Will they provide you training? How much is that training and additional resources going to cost? And are there new tools in place that are going to allow you to support this more complex coding? So it's critical with everything that's mentioned, coder productivity going down, the additional onus on your staff, your providers, enhanced documentation, enhanced system effectiveness. It's very critical to estimate your budget now. There are many calculators out there that attempt to estimate the transition costs from ICD-9 to ICD-10, and most of them have similar numbers. What I typically say is a practice should be thinking about this now and not be caught off guard. Brand Corporation estimates that as many as 10 to 15% of the practices could potentially be forced out of business just with the cost associated with this change. Those will be the same practices that are not adequately budgeting and not adequately prepared for the transition. Your budget should take into account both the direct cost of system upgrades and training, as well as the indirect but very real cost of lost productivities and disruptions in your cash flow. Preparation on your side, as well as the consideration of payer issues and delays, should be considered. When we transition to 5010, most organizations and providers were prepared to submit the claims. However, there was issues on the payer side that prevented the update of the 5010 format and delayed payments. CMS is so concerned about the latter that they are recommending that practices have up to 6 months of annual revenue and days cash on hand in the bank as of October 1st, 2015. So some budgeted items to be considered. Again, your hardware, your software costs, any updates required for your interfaces, forms revisions, training to all staff members as well as providers, looking at your productivity losses and lost cash flow. So with that, we have another poll question. Allison?
Thanks, Mike. So our next question is, does your practice have the recommended 6 months of annual revenue in the bank for the October 1st deadline? Yes, no, or don't know? We'll just give that a few seconds for people to respond. Okay, I'm going to close that out, and I'm going to share it with the group. So only 11% said yes, they have that revenue in the bank. 38% said no, and 51% don't know if they have the funds available.
Okay. So once you understand the true cost of making the transition, it is time to step back and consider all your options. Continuing to go it alone in this increasingly complexity of revenue cycle may simply not be the best way forward for your practice. The level of investment required to keep systems updated, to have access to all the smart tools and capabilities to ensure data integrity, and to keep the staff with the necessary expertise and experience is beyond the resources of the average practice. For most practices, managing this process is diverting resources and time away from the reason that they're truly in business, which is caring for patients. When the process of simply getting paid takes more time than the work on behalf of the patient, it might be time to consider partnering with a company dedicated to helping you navigate these revenue cycle challenges. Working with a revenue cycle management company will take away many of these burdens. A company like MD Everywhere has already made the significant investment required to keep up with today's revenue cycle requirements. A revenue cycle company can be your expert billing department with the critical mass to ensure consistent and effective revenue cycle processes. You can be about the art of medicine while these experts take care of the business side. So there's no question that everyone is going to require training. If not the full certification of the new code set, a process they are involved in is likely to be changing. And yes, physicians are going to require extensive amounts of training. Even if they do not do the final coding of the encounter, they will need to understand the new documentation requirements related to the specificity for the new code selection. If it's not documented correctly, then it never really was done. Some considerations of the training plan include physicians and coders are going to require the most time. So keep that in plan as you're mapping out your transition plan to ICD-10. Look at the local and distance options that are available, whether it be boot camps, conferences, webinars, but also online training is a great tool that allows providers and staff to access the educational elements at their convenience at any location. You're likely going to need to add resources during this training process, either temporary help or overtime, in order to ensure that your current process and revenue flows don't dip too much and that you have backfill. And make sure that your training materials are available. Books, but as I mentioned before, really the most effective and efficient form to give reference material back is to have the education materials online and at the user's fingertips from any location. Ideally, these resources are going to be integrated into your day-to-day systems. MD Everywhere has partnered with an online training expert to provide access to comprehensive training within its revenue cycle system. So as you're doing the work, the education and the refreshers are there at your fingertips. And with that, I believe we're at a location for another poll question, Allison.
Yes, we are. So our next question, and this is our final poll question, do you have a training plan in place for your staff? Yes, we're already training staff. Yes, we will start training shortly. No, we don't have a training plan, or I don't know. I'll give you a few minutes to get started. Excellent. Okay, I'm going to close it and share it with the group. So 21% say yes, we're already training staff, which is fantastic. Training is incredibly important, and you have the sooner the better. 24% say they're going to start training shortly. 48% said no, we don't have a training plan, and 8% say that they don't know.
Okay, well, it's good that we're talking about this now. There's no better day than today to start the preparation and task of training your staff. With only 200 calendar days left, that's really limiting the amount of time that we can ensure everyone within the organization is going to be effectively educated and trained in new processes. So I think we're at a point now that where we can start that process. So in looking at analyzing your business processes, it's really important to conduct assessment of all your clinical and your operational processes, determine every place that the ICD-9 codes are currently used. And you really may be surprised by this answer. When most people think about the International Classification of Disease Code set, they immediately think about using these codes as the basis of their revenue cycle process in their medical bill. But to diagnose these code sets are used throughout operational and clinical processes. They're used in reporting and adverse event tracking and coding systems and patient recalls and scheduling, et cetera. You should conduct a thorough assessment of all the operational and clinical processes to identify every single location that ICD-9 codes are used throughout your organization or your practice. You need to identify all systems and processes that currently use the codes and explore if they need to be upgraded to ICD-10. These include clinical, administrative, such as your practice management and your registration system, other revenue cycle systems, quality public health, business intelligence reporting systems. All of these are going to be impacted and affected. You need to review existing policies and procedures related to ICD-9 and identify any necessary changes that are going to be included, such as ICD-9 to ICD-10 reporting, auditing and clinical documentation reviews, and review of specific clinical events or adverse events. You need to identify reports that are based on the ICD-9 system, including internal quality improvement or external systems such as federal adverse drug, medical devices, any pay for performance, research such as state public health, newborn screening, vaccination updates. It's important to think through how reports using historical and or the longitudinal data are going to work after this transition. The goal of ICD-10 is to improve the clinical reporting, not break it or lose all the history from ICD-9. So looking at those cross-max, understanding how you're going to use that aggregate clinical data from ICD-9 as it transitions to ICD-10 is going to be important. Look to identify the impact of ICD-10 on your payer and your health plan contracts. You should start by identifying contracts where reimbursement is tied to particular diagnosis codes. Proactively contacting your payers to discuss potential changes in the existing contracts or modify fee agreements if needed. And make sure to document all these conversations. These changes should be reflected in your revenue cycle system and communicated to the appropriate revenue cycle management staff. You would have spoken separate conversations with payers about timing and process for testing of their systems, and also make sure to investigate and understand any potential impact to incentive structures or payments associated with your health plan. So when we go through the step-by-step preparation, we've done the assessment, understanding our processes, and now we really need to get into the phase one of education and training. Phase one training is really about your organizational awareness and the what, when, hows, and whys of the ICD-10 transition. It should include administrative, managerial staff, physician coders, and billing staff, and really anyone that is going to have a play or a part in the revenue cycle process or is going to have any reporting or update as it relates to the ICD-9 to ICD-10 transition. This phase is meant to level set and get everyone in your practice on the same page as to the potential impact of the change, as well as the process timelines your practice or organization is going to follow to ensure that your transition is going to be successful. Now, the second phase of training should include much more detail and be focused specialty-specific changes. There's many tools, online courses, webinars, in-house training, seminars, etc., are going to be similar and broad, but the content more detailed and specialized. This is when you have to make sure that your coding team is going to achieve recertification. Proficiency testing is already available, and all certified coders must pass the proficiency test on ICD-10 in order to maintain their current coding certification. So review your current ICD-9 coding and identify the most frequently used codes. You can use this information to create cheat sheets for your providers and your coders. And then also look at using state-of-the-art revenue cycle systems like MD Everware's purpose-built Practice First solution, which includes online access to training resources, as well as sophisticated search, natural language processing, search engines, as well as mapping tools for diagnosis selection. Your physician training should focus as much on the documentation as the changes to the most frequently used codes. So the biggest part about ICD-10 from a physician involvement, even if they're not doing the final code selection, is ensuring that their documentation supports the specificity that's going to be needed and required for ICD-10 transition. Looking at laterality specific organ systems is going to be a key component and differentiates itself from ICD-9. Having your providers look at their most frequently documented diagnosis and focusing your education on those areas will be assistance in helping them get over the hump associated with the documentation requirements for ICD-10. So designing your outcome measures, it's important to define your outcome measures. George Bernard Shaw said that the only man I know who behaves sensibly is my tailor. He takes my measurements anew each time he sees me. The regressors go on with the old measurements and expect them to fit me. Measuring coder productivity when using ICD-9 to set a baseline should be your first go. So look at what you're currently doing from a productivity perspective on coding ICD-9 diagnosis. Compare that to the ICD-10 coding productivity after the initial training has been complete. I'm going to make an assumption that it's more than likely going to be significantly lower than what they're doing in the past. So understanding what those measures are and understanding what the outcomes are going to be important to track their progress on the ICD-10 transition. Reevaluate your medical record documentation to make sure that it helps lead and support the appropriate ICD-10 documentation requirements for coding. Create internal testing of your coding and your billing staff to ensure that they are ICD-10 proficient, and continue to provide additional education and training to your staff as deficiencies are identified. So as you continue to reinforce, go back to that baseline coding and identify and track after each educational and learning session to ensure that your coders and your staff and your billing personnel continue to gain and increase efficiency and proficiency with the ICD-10 coding. The more prepared they are, the less of an impact it's going to have to your organization from a cash flow perspective. So we talked a little bit in the past about updates by your software vendors. If your vendor is not yet prepared, then you should be extremely concerned, especially with last year's delay. So we've had plenty of time to make sure that we were prepared, and we should have been there by now. Going through last-minute changes is very risky, especially given the level of investment required to update some of these legacy systems. Some vendors may opt to sunset the product lines entirely or even fold up and not offer the solution anymore. If you haven't upgraded or don't have a firm date for your upgrading, you really need to be out now looking for a new partner. All systems should be upgraded no later than March 31st in order to allow at least 5 months of minimally adequate testing. And again, I say this is minimally adequate. Testing should already be occurring over the past 12 to 14 months just to ensure that everything is tight. March 31st, however, is the absolute latest deadline. You should be looking for upgrades and testing of your ICD-10 affected products. You should also understand how your vendors will accommodate dual coding, such as workers' comp and no fault, as well as disability carriers are not required to make the switch to ICD-10, and so are unlikely to make necessary investments that are going to have to do so. So your system needs to be able to accommodate both the ICD-9 for those payers that don't have to switch to ICD-10, as well as the ICD-10 at the measure of go live date. So you need to make sure and you understand your vendor's testing timeline and the processes associated with their testing. You need to integrate software programs into your systems, make internal customization after deployments of code by vendors, integrate changes into production systems, testing systems with clearinghouses, payers, electronic claim transmission, really doing end-to-end testing to ensure vendors will maintain updates to code during this entire transition period. You need to confirm what code sets have been tested. Are you testing the 270, the 271, your 835 or 837 processes associated with your electronic billing and electronic remittance devices? And really, as you're doing all of this, whatever integration that you have, make sure you don't forget about your interfaces. Make sure that both systems that you're either interfacing from or to are prepared for ICD-10 and that you have overly tested these interfaces with the new code set to ensure effectiveness. So when we look at implementation and also the audit and quality process, even with all your careful preparation and pre-work, Murphy Law always tells us that a change of this magnitude, it's very, very likely and almost maybe virtually assured that something is going to go wrong. Your goal should be to have audit procedures in place to identify it, find it, and fix it quickly. You need to have a detailed audit steps in place for at least 2 complete full billing cycles with each and every one of your payers. For internal processes, have a thorough QA process in place to ensure that the documentation is being done correctly and that the documentation is being appropriately translated into the new codes. You need to monitor your productivity and accuracy and provide additional training to your staff along the way if required. Now, if you or your clearinghouse is using a mapping system, audit the translations to make sure that any translation from one system to a foreign system is translating correctly. Make sure that your practice management system and your clearinghouse are transmitting all of the claims correctly and completely. Watch for new and unfamiliar rejection types from your clearinghouse and denials from your payers. And finally, make sure that your payers are accepting and adjudicating claims correctly and timely. Pay very close attention to whether you're getting paid correctly and monitor all denials extremely closely for any coding type related problem. Now, one of the most critical ways to prepare is through claims testing. End-to-end testing allows practices to submit test claims and receive a remittance advice back from the payers. Ideally, all practices should conduct end-to-end testing with all payers well before the deadline. Front-end testing, as well, where practices can send test claims and receive a simple acknowledgement of the receipt back, is available with CMS at any time until the compliance date. Now, end-to-end testing weeks with CMS will occur January, April, and July, and all testing should be scheduled through your MAC. Now, there is much to consider as your practice plans to transition to ICD-10. The good news is that there are many resources that your practice can access. Consultants to help assess where you are and to help manage the implementation process of where you need to be. Training companies providing comprehensive training resources and certification bodies to assess proficiency with the new code set, as well as many tools available online for quick and easy access. And finally, revenue cycle companies to help lighten the burden for your practice. So it's time now to pull that file out of the drawer, dust it off, and we all need to get to work with the 200-plus days ahead. And with that, I want to thank everyone for your time, and I'm going to pass it over to Allison for some closing remarks.